In an often unforgiving climate, Finns fell back to the survival skills they learned as children. It was part of a character quality summed up in the word sisu.
It means that personal kind of ability or spirit that every Finn is supposed to have, that when things go wrong, you don't give up.
In August of 1939, the balance of power in Europe suddenly shifted. Communist Russia and Nazi Germany, mortal ideological enemies, suddenly became allies.
The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was the key that really made the war possible, because it gave Stalin a free hand in those parts of Europe that the treaty allowed him to move into.
On September 1st, Germany invaded Poland from the west, utilizing a new form of warfare called blitzkrieg. On September 17th, Soviet troops launched a similar attack from the east. The two armies met at the Bug River. In October, the Soviets demanded and gained concessions for military bases in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Finland's turn came last.
They could see that this was not just a war to change the borders a couple of kilometers. This was a total war where Stalin intended to occupy and dominate Finland.
The Finns refused to accept our conditions, so we were left with no choice but to decide the question by war.
On November 28th, the Soviet Union broke off diplomatic relations. On November 30th, Soviet troops crossed Finland's borders. Finland's entire army, a total of 300,000 soldiers, including reserves, faced the world's largest army of more than 2 million soldiers, with many millions more in reserve. The first week of fighting demonstrated the power of Soviet armor. Finnish troops were pushed back. Shock and fear accompanied retreat and defeat. They searched for a way to beat back Soviet armor.
Our platoon leader informed us we were about to receive secret weapons that could blow up and burn any enemy tank. It did not take long until the promise was fulfilled.
The Molotov cocktail is probably the most famous poor man's weapon system of the 20th century, and it was named after Stalin's foreign minister, Molotov. If you got up behind the tank and dropped a bottle of flaming gasoline into those air ducts, the flaming gasoline would get sucked into the engine, the tank's fuel would blow up, and for the price of a half a gallon of gas, you could destroy an enemy tank.
Toinen oli sitten nämä kasapanokset, ja siinä oli oltava vielä lähempänä, koska se ei ollut sitä pystynyt heittämään oikeastaan paljon 10-15 metriä pitemmän matkaa, että se oli sitten se toinen hurja torjuntakeino. Ja kolmas, jota myöskin käytettiin, jolloin vieläkin hurjemmat miehet täytyy sitten olla sen suorittamassa, pantiin halko.
There was one ski trooper who was decorated for actually immobilizing a Russian tank with a crowbar. He pried the treads off by brute force, whereupon his partner came out with a satchel charge and blew it up.
I was full of fear and full of care because of father who was in the war. And then I felt that I had to be worried all the time, because it was like giving strength to our men. We were called home front.
Women had to do all those things what the men used to do when they were at home. So they had to work in the factories. At that time, our country had lots of small farms. If the husband was taken to the front, the woman there had to do all the work. And as also 50,000 horses were taken to the front, which just they couldn't work there without the horses. So from many houses, the horse was taken, so the woman had to work almost as a horse also.
My grandmother and I were part of the women's auxiliary, which was called Lotta Svärd, which is based on a poem during one of the wars that Finns fought. And Lotta Svärd was the name of the woman that took care of the soldiers.
Lotta Svärd organized 100,000 women in defense of their homeland.
The women knitted all kinds of woolen things to the soldiers, those what we call huppu, and where only eyes and the mouth possibly was seen. And then horrible gloves where there was a hole in the place of the first finger, and it was for the rifle, of course.
When the women packed up boxes of food and clothing to send to the soldiers, Eva Kelpi added her own contribution.
I wrote some poems. They were often like some prayers. Oh God, protect us, help us. And then I tried to rhyme them. I must have felt that there's something in the art, that there's some, maybe I'm romanticizing this now, but I must have felt in the strength of words, even at that time, as a child of 11.
Then there was something which has been done in no other country or war ever. Sometimes the soldier who has been shot or the bomb has killed him, you know how he looked, but the young Lottas washed them. First of all, in a winter war, they had to be melted because they were all frozen, you know. They melted them, they washed them, they put them in a nice, beautiful clothes, and the men then put them in coffins because they were heavy, and then they were sent, all of them, each one, to their home areas. And the young Lottas did this.
Crossing the Taipale River now takes about 10 minutes. The cost is 50 rubles per car. The ferry is a section of an old Red Army pontoon bridge, powered by a recycled engine. In 1939, the river crossing was a killing zone.
This is a place where the Soviet troops get across the Taipale River and established a bridgehead. When the Soviet engineers established the pontoon bridge, the many casualties were because of Finnish fires. So this bank was full of Soviet engineers' bodies.
Kirill Yakimovich is an engineer from St. Petersburg. He has crossed this river and walked this ground since childhood. He has looked beneath the surface and studied it carefully. Gradually, he learned its awful secrets.
I suppose that the Soviet 105th Rifle Division occupied these dugouts. There are plenty of them here. Dugouts, foxholes, which Soviet soldiers excavated.
They attacked across this open field. It began on December 6th.
They were frontal assaults over and over and over again against the same heavily defended Finnish lines. Entire battalions were wiped out.
By December 17th, 3 Russian divisions had failed to breach Finnish defenses at Taipale.
The Russians went in principally for mass attack, which resulted in the attackers being mown down to the last man by a few well-placed automatic weapons. In spite of this, one attacking wave after another would follow with a similar result.
In some cases, the second, third, fourth wave attacks were actually able to get closer to Finnish lines by taking cover behind their own dead. The temperature was so low that after an hour, a corpse would stop a bullet just as well as a brick wall.
The carnage was too much for some defenders.
There were instances where, for instance, Finnish machine gunners became psychologically unstable because they were called upon to commit this absolutely mindless slaughter day after day after day. They may have hated the Russians for invading their country, but these were not automatons. These were human beings with wives and children, and they were being called to murder hundreds of men a day.
On December 17th, the Soviet offensive shifted to the most strategically important and the most vulnerable sectors of the Mannerheim Line, Suma and Ladi. A breakthrough here would open a gate to the city of Viborg.
One flamethrower tank started to throw flames into the trench at Harkila strongpoint. Fire from Millionaire bunker and from our infantry prevented the enemy's infantry from getting into our trenches. 2 machine guns fired a total of 40,000 rounds.
Our men held out bitterly in their trenches. There was no panic. Many silent dead littered the ground in front of our positions.
Ja urhoollisia taistelijoita nämä olivat puna-armeijan miehet. Ei siinä mitään, vaikka meidän tulitimme niin paljon kuin pystyimme suomalaisilla konekivääreillä, pikakivääreillä ja kivääreillä, niin juoksivat siinä niin, että piikkilanka-aidoille tulivat ja juoksivat sitten vielä toistensa yli, jotka kuolivat siihen.
The tanks stopped, took casualties, and started to withdraw. This completely demoralized our infantry. The division did not have any success during the day of December 17th, 1939, and after darkness, infantry was withdrawn, having suffered heavy losses.
The battle was stressful, both physically and psychologically. In spite of a whole day of heavy fighting, we were not depressed. The fact that we held on gave us confidence.
That confidence was tested each morning of an unrelenting Soviet offensive.
The enemy's artillery barrage in the morning of December 19th grew to an overwhelming thunder and hit the main defensive line in Summa village the hardest. Our platoon leader gave me responsibility for dealing with the tanks approaching us on the highway. There were no signs of life inside the tank. With our small contribution to the fighting on this day, the hardest of the hardest days was over.
But even harder days would follow.
Tanks again broke through. In the evening, we counterattacked.
Despite all our shortages in equipment, we did the enemy a lot of harm. There were men in our platoon for whom the destruction of tanks was just a regular day's work.
December 21st, 1939. It was Stalin's 60th birthday. His generals had promised Finland as a gift. Instead, they sent back trainloads of dead and wounded, and more bad news from the battlefront.
I saw a field and our dead men lying like heaps of grass during harvest. The next day we did not attack. Our losses were too high and the assault was cancelled.
The offensive against Suma and Taipale during the month of December had decimated 7 Soviet infantry divisions. The remains of 250 tanks littered the battlefield. It was a stunning defensive victory for Finland. Mid-December, winter deepened. Temperatures descended. The winter of 1939 was one of the coldest in recorded history, with temperatures consistently below zero.